A gentleman collapsed mid-toast. His last word was Corinthian. Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. I am your host, Santiago Rivas. Drop a comment. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Thanks for being part of this sharp-eyed circle. Now the case begins. It started as these things do on a Tuesday, the kind of dreary mid-March Tuesday that turns the New York sidewalks to brown slush and makes even orchids look like they need a hot bath and a martini. I was in the office, feet on the corner of my desk, flipping through a brochure someone had slipped under our front door advertising a new laundry service trusted by society's finest. Nero Wolfe, naturally, had declined to dignify it with a glance. His idea of risk-taking with domestic affairs was letting Fritz try a new vinaigrette. At precisely 11:32 a.m., the doorbell rang. Ordinarily, that's not notable. People come to us, some with checks, some with trouble, most with both. But this one was different. First, he wasn't on the calendar. Second, when I answered, the door I was greeted by a man whose presence could be described with charitable precision as flamboyant. He wore a powder blue waistcoat under a camel overcoat, a silk cravat that might have once belonged to a matador, and he smelled faintly of cigars, cologne, and scandal. I presume I have the honor of addressing the residence of Mr. Nero Wolfe? He asked, arching an eyebrow like he'd practiced in front of a Venetian mirror. You presume correctly, I said. And you are? My name is Aubrey Harrow. I'm here on behalf of the Corinthian Club. Now, I'd heard of the Corinthian Club. Most people had, unless they spent their nights under rocks or in Queens. It was old, exclusive, and expensive, the kind of place where former ambassadors and future felons sip sherry in rooms panelled with oak and secrets. I didn't budge from the threshold. You'll understand if I ask what business the Corinthian Club has with Mr. Wolfe. He gave a thin smile. I believe Mr. Wolfe may be uniquely suited to assist us with a delicate matter, a matter of internal discretion. Well, discretion wasn't on our business card, but it was implied. In Wolfe's general distaste for the human race, I gave him the once-over. You're not packing a gun, are you? Only a Mont Blanc pen, he said. That got a raised brow from me. Come in. He stepped inside, dripping money and mystery all over the parquet floor. I led him to the office and gave Wolfe the briefest of nods. Wolfe was in his chair, of course he was, surrounded by the usual barricade of dictionaries, pamphlets, and unread correspondence. He didn't look up. Mr. Aubrey Harrow, I announced, representing the Corinthian Club seeking discretion. Wolfe's eyelids flicked open. He studied the man as if he were a new variety of fungus. Harrow inclined his head. Mr. Wolfe, it is a pleasure. I am not acquainted with your club, Wolfe said, and I don't enjoy being interrupted during my morning digestion. I slipped behind my desk and waited. If Harrow was expecting the red carpet treatment, he was about to learn how Wolfe rolled that carpet back up, slowly and with disdain. Forgive me, Harrow said smoothly, but I believe the matter at hand may interest you. One of our members, a certain Mr. Quentin Belgrave, has, how shall I say, taken a rather abrupt leave of absence. Voluntary or otherwise? I asked. Technically voluntary, Harrow replied, though under less than voluntary circumstances. You see, a document has gone missing from the club's private archives, an internal manifesto dating from the club's founding in 1892. Not valuable in any financial sense, but politically compromising. were it to find its way into the wrong hands. Wolfe sniffed. Your club's internal politics are not my concern. No, Harrow agreed, but the document was last seen in Mr. Belgrave's possession, and now he's disappeared. Disappeared, Wolfe repeated as if tasting the word. And what prevents you from engaging a private investigator more, shall we say, nimble? Because, Harrow said, adjusting his cufflinks, our bylaws forbid external interference. But the club president, myself, has certain discretionary privileges. Mr. Wolfe, you are not a licensed private investigator. You are, however, a man of reputation, and we believe Mr. Belgrave would not have left voluntarily unless he was being pressured, or unless he intended something regrettable. Wolfe frowned. That was as close to leaning forward as he ever got. I added, So what do you think Belgrave is doing with this manifesto? Planning to auction it off to a rival club? Publish it in the Daily Ledger for a laugh? Harrow hesitated. We fear he may be using it to blackmail another member. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Name? I would rather not. Then I would rather not listen. Harrow looked at me, then back at Wolfe. Very well, the member in question is Mr. Robert Helmsley. I whistled softly. Helmsley was an ex-senator with a comb-over, a temper, and enough skeletons in his closet to furnish a haunted mansion. If someone was threatening him, it wasn't just internal, it was combustible. Wolfe tapped a finger on the arm of his chair. Mr. Harrow, this smells of politics, ambition, and petty grudges. I detest all three. Then consider this, Harrow said. I will pay your standard retainer plus an additional fee if you prevent this from becoming a public disgrace. Wolfe closed his eyes again. That meant the wheels were turning. After a pause, Archie will accompany you to your club. He will see where Mr. Belgrave last sat, what he drank, what he read. He will speak with your staff. You will provide access. Of course. And he will do so as my agent. No restrictions. You have my word. Wolfe opened his eyes. Very well, Mr. Goodwin, prepare yourself. Do not return until you know how many men wear powder-blue waistcoats at that club, and why none of them have brains enough to keep a document where it belongs. And with that, the game was afoot, or at least the chair was anchored, and I was sent into the unknown. The Corinthian Club, from the outside, looks like the sort of place where secrets go to sip brandy and die of old age, tucked between a Greek revival townhouse and a faceless bank on East 72nd. The club's sandstone facade rises with the quiet entitlement of old money. You wouldn't notice it unless you'd been told to look, and even then, you might mistake. Heard for the sort of place where nothing ever happens, unless you know better. I know better. Aubrey Harrow and I arrived by cab at 12:17 p.m., which gave me exactly enough time to observe that his cravat had shifted a quarter-inch to the left, that his shoes were polished to a military shine, and that he wasn't as calm as he pretended to be. The man was sweating under that fancy coat, and it wasn't the weather doing it. The doorman gave us a polite nod as we passed through the heavy double doors. Inside, the air changed. It always does in places like that, filtered, fragrant, and carrying just a trace of mothballs and hierarchy. A liveried attendant took Harrow's coat. I kept mine on, partly because I wasn't planning on staying long, and partly because I'd already caught sight of the first thing out of place, a missing painting. Is that wall usually empty? I asked. Harrow followed my gaze. You have an eye for detail, Mr. Goodwin. I get paid to have it. He gave a tight smile. It was removed yesterday, officially for restoration. Unofficially, we needed the wall space for a discreet discussion among the executive board. About Belgrave? Harrow nodded once. He led me past the lobby, down a corridor lined with oil portraits of men who looked like they owned railroads or scuttled unions for sport. The Corinthian Club was a palace of legacy. There were centuries-old decanters on side tables, a grandfather clock that probably had a longer resume than I did, and a hush that settled over everything like a silk cloth over silver. We reached the reading room. Mahogany panels, green-shaded, lamps, leather chairs deep enough to lose your conscience in. Harrow gestured toward the far window. That's where Belgrave always sat. Corner armchair near the western window. He was there the afternoon the manifesto went missing. I stepped in. The place had that dense, bookish smell, like cigars, old bindings, and self-importance. I could see the impressions in the leather seat, faint traces of pipe ash in the ashtray, and a neatly folded copy of the New York Herald, dated 3 days. Goes, folded in fourths, left page upward. He left this here. Yes, Harrow said. Our staff doesn't discard anything belonging to a member unless specifically instructed. Smart or lazy. Could be either. I crouched by the side table and took a closer look. Belgrave's reading glasses were still there, one arm bent inward at a slight angle. Not carelessness, use. Someone had left in a hurry, or planned to return. Either way, he hadn't planned to vanish. I stood. When was the last time anyone saw Belgrave? Late Sunday afternoon. He had tea with Mr. Helmsley in the East Garden lounge. The senator. Yes. What did they talk about? That Mr. Goodwin remains private. I looked at him. And yet here I am. He shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't present. Only the staff might have overheard. Then let's meet the staff. To his credit, Harrow didn't flinch. He led me downstairs to what they called the service wing, a euphemism for people who actually work. There, amid the efficient hum of quiet movement, I met Lydia Trent, the club's head steward. She was small, quick-eyed, and wore a uniform sharper than most lieutenants. "Mr. Goodwin is assisting us," Harrow said. "I've heard," she said, giving me a once-over that was all business. "You'll want to speak with Carson, one of our afternoon waiters. He was on duty in the lounge when Mr. Belgrave and Mr. Helmsley met. Where is he?" "Upstairs in the break lounge. I'll fetch him." Carson turned out to be a wiry young man with a face that hadn't yet learned discretion. His hands twitched when I asked about the meeting. "I didn't eavesdrop, sir," he said, "but I had to pass by. Tea service." Of course, they were arguing, well, low voices, but intense. Mr. Belgrave kept tapping the table. Mr. Helmsley looked ill, flushed. "Did you catch any words?" He hesitated. "Belgrave said something about consequences." "That's all I remember." "You sure?" A pause. "There was another thing. After they left, I went to clear the table. There was a card left behind, not a calling card, something else, tucked under a saucer." "What kind of card?" "Like a club membership card, but different, embossed initials." "Do you have it?" He flushed. "No. It was gone when I came back. I went to get a cloth, and when I returned, it was gone." I glanced at Harrow. Who else had access to the lounge? He frowned. "Several staff, and Mr. Jerome Fenwick. He was there earlier. Who's Fenwick? Another board member. Opposed to Belgrave's recent motions, they had disagreements. Naturally. Was Fenwick aware of the missing document? Harrow hesitated. He was on the executive council, yes. I made a note of that. Belgrave gets into an argument with a senator, leaves a cryptic card behind, and someone scoops it up within minutes. Meanwhile, a controversial document, centuries old and politically loaded, goes missing, and Belgrave disappears without his glasses, newspaper, or dignity. Either the man had a plan, or he was running scared. I spent another hour combing the club, the records room tightly locked, the garden lounge trimmed and deserted, and the wine cellar tempting but not helpful. Everywhere I turned, things looked normal, perfectly suspiciously normal. By the time I returned to the brownstone, it was just after 4. Fritz was preparing something that smelled like saffron and subtle triumph. I walked into the office and found Wolfe exactly where I'd left him, imperial and immobile. "Well?" he asked. Belgrave argued with a senator, left a card behind, then vanished. His glasses and paper were left at the scene, and someone pinched the card within minutes. The document is still missing, and one of the other board members had every reason to want him silenced. Wolfe didn't react. I added, "There's also a painting missing, supposedly for restoration." That earned a slight twitch of an eyebrow. He reached for his beer. "Mr. Harrow's problem," Wolfe said, "is not the disappearance of a man or a manuscript. It is the presence of secrets he cannot control. What he wants is containment. He might get the opposite. Then he should not have come to me." I sat, cracked my knuckles, and leaned back. "So what's the next move?" Wolfe considered. "You will return tomorrow. But first, have Saul speak with the club's archivist. Quietly. I want to know who last accessed the founding. Records before they vanished. On it." Wolfe closed his eyes. "Also inquire discreetly whether Mr. Helmsley has recently met with a lawyer." I raised a brow. "You think he's lawyering up?" "No, I think he's being blackmailed." And with that, the chessboard started to shift. The following morning, I found myself back at the Corinthian Club, which looked even more impervious. In the daylight, like a marble tomb with a membership fee. I'd called Saul Panzer first thing and given him Wolfe's instructions. If there was anyone in New York who could get into a locked archive without so much as a paperclip out of place, it was Saul. He didn't ask questions, just said 2 hours and hung up. That's how you know a man is good at his job. This time I didn't wait for Harrow. I'd already had enough of his pomp and powder blue wardrobe. Instead, I checked in with Lydia Trent, who looked mildly surprised to see me, but offered no protest. I asked her where I could find Fenwick, the board member who'd been lurking around the lounge after Belgrave's little meeting with the senator. "He often lunches in the Oak Room around this hour," she said. "Alone?" "Usually. Not today." She didn't crack a smile, but I swear the corner of her lip twitched. "I'll let him know you're coming." "No need. I'll surprise him." The Oak Room was the club's crown jewel, a vaulted chamber panelled in warm English oak with coffered ceilings and a fireplace that looked like it had once hosted royal confessions. The light came through leaded windows in a soft, forgiving haze, and the tables were spaced wide enough for secrets to breathe. Only 2 of them were occupied. Jerome Fenwick was at the far end, holding a wine glass like it contained the last of his patience. His silver hair was brushed back with the sort of precision that either came from discipline or vanity, and his navy pinstripe suit looked like it had been ironed by a valet with OCD. He didn't notice me approach, which gave me a few seconds to take him in. He looked like the kind of man who hated being questioned, but hated not being in control even more. I slid into the seat across from him. "Mind if I join you?" He set the glass down slowly. "That depends. Are you here as a guest or an intrusion?" "I'd say I'm an interruption, but let's keep it friendly. Who are you?" "Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. You might have heard of him." His eyes narrowed just slightly. "Yes, Mr. Harrow mentioned him. Though I confess, I don't see what business this is of yours." "That's the beauty of it," I said. "I'm just here to ask questions. You can answer or not. It's a free country." Fenwick gave a little sigh. "You're wasting your time." Belgrave always had an appetite for melodrama. If he's vanished, it's because he wants attention, or because someone doesn't want him to talk. I let that hang. Fenwick didn't flinch. "Do you know what was in the missing manifesto?" He sipped his wine. "Of course, I do. I wrote the preservation policy that governs it." "That so?" "Yes. The founding manifesto is a symbolic document. The usual pomp about tradition, discretion, honor among gentlemen. It doesn't contain nuclear codes. Maybe not, but I hear Belgrave thought it was useful enough to go missing with. Fenwick's smile was the kind people use in place of slapping you. Belgrave was trying to modernize the club in ways that many of us found distasteful. He wanted to open the club's membership criteria, remove legacy requirements, encourage transparency. A revolutionary, a nuisance. And Helmsley? He wasn't a fan of those ideas either. I wouldn't presume to speak for the senator. "No need. I can read posture." Fenwick sat back. "What are you implying?" "That Belgrave disappeared after confronting Helmsley, that a document walked out of the archives under someone's nose, and that you, conveniently, were present when something vanished from the lounge." His fingers tightened on the wineglass stem. "I don't take kindly to insinuations. And I don't take kindly to lies." We stared each other down. For a few seconds I held my ground. He broke first. "Fine, I saw the card. Bingo. And? It was left under the saucer, but I didn't touch it. I simply assumed it was Belgrave's way of leaving a message. He was fond of cryptic theatrics." "Describe the card." "White, embossed initials, QB, and something that looked like a laurel crest." I pulled out my notebook. "Why didn't you mention this yesterday?" "Because it's club business, and I didn't think a disappearance merited scandal. Scandal might already be on the way." He said nothing. I left him to his Bordeaux and made a mental note. Fenwick knew more than he was letting on. He wasn't stupid, but he was scared. Not of Belgrave, of what Belgrave might have known. By the time I stepped outside, Saul had already messaged me to meet him 4 blocks west. We found a corner booth at a half-empty deli, and he passed me a folded sheet of paper with his usual elegance. "Archivist's log," he said. "I didn't break anything, just borrowed a lens." "Who accessed the document?" 3 names in the last 6 weeks. Fenwick, Harrow, and Belgrave. Nobody else. "What about Helmsley?" "No record, but get this. 2 weeks ago the document was marked for transfer to a private reading session by Harrow's signature. It was supposed to be returned the same day." "It wasn't." "Guess." I leaned back. Harrow said it was last seen in Belgrave's possession. Saul raised an eyebrow. And yet Harrow signed it out? I didn't answer. My appetite was gone. Wolfe was in his chair when I got back to the brownstone, sipping beer and reading a volume on Byzantine ceremonial law, probably to cleanse his brain from dealing with Aubrey Harrow's type. I gave him the update. When I mentioned Harrow's signature on the archive log, Wolfe closed the book and steepled his fingers. Hypocrisy, he said, is the grease by which gentlemen's clubs survive their own contradictions. So what now? Now we provoke them. Subtle. Or loud. Subtle, of course. He reached for the phone and gave me a nod. Call Mr. Harrow. Invite him here tomorrow at 10. Then call Mr. Fenwick. Inform him I have a question regarding the club's internal voting records. I blinked. That'll spook him. Precisely. He picked up his glass again. Archie, the problem with secrets is that they multiply and someone is running out of space to hide them. By 9:53 the next morning, the brownstone was bathed in the low gold glow of late winter sunlight, which filtered through the window blinds and gave the office a feeling of deliberate calm. Wolfe was already in position, anchored in his oversized chair, trimmed mustache pristine, a fresh glass of beer to his right. I had laid out the morning mail, none of which would be opened unless it concerned orchids, beer, or unpaid bills. Preferably none. The invitation had gone out as planned. Mr. Harrow at 10 sharp, Mr. Fenwick an hour later. Wolfe's only instruction to me had been, let them speak first. That's a particular kind of strategy, best executed by a man who can make silence feel like indictment. At precisely 10, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered, ushering Harrow in with his usual Teutonic grace. The man was dressed in a charcoal overcoat this time, but the cravat was back, this time a darker red, less flamboyant, but still signaling a man who wasn't used to being questioned without controlling the pace. He offered Wolfe a nod and a smile. Mr. Wolfe, I trust you've made progress. Wolfe didn't move. I've made motion, he said. Progress remains in dispute. Harrow blinked, clearly not expecting that. I gestured for him to sit in the red leather chair across from Wolfe, while I took my usual post by the desk. Pen and notebook at the ready. The morning was off to a good start. Mr. Harrow, Wolfe said, lacing his fingers, I must ask you to clarify your account of the document's last known location. I told Mr. Goodwin Belgrave had... You did, but the archive record says otherwise. You signed it out. Harrow's expression tightened just slightly. Yes, I did, at Belgrave's request. He wanted to review it in private. You did not accompany him? No. He had it in his room at the club for several hours. He returned it to me personally and said he no longer needed it. And you returned it to the archive? Harrow hesitated. No, I placed it in the interim file drawer in the boardroom. I meant to return it later that day, but was called away. And when you returned? It was gone. Wolfe's tone didn't change. So the chain of custody ended with you. You entrusted a sensitive document to a drawer. Harrow straightened. It's a secure boardroom. Only senior members have access. That is precisely the concern. You made it accessible to anyone with privilege and motive. Harrow exhaled through his nose. I didn't anticipate... You anticipated nothing. A dangerous habit in your position. That silenced him. I made a note. Wolfe wasn't merely cornering Harrow. He was baiting him, testing how much of this was blunder and how much was willful omission? Wolfe continued. One more point. Mr. Fenwick observed a card left by Belgrave in the lounge. QBE Laurel Crest. You did not mention this. I wasn't aware anyone saw it. That isn't what I said. Harrow flushed. Yes, I saw it. I assumed it was Belgrave's way of provoking someone. He enjoyed gestures. What was on the back of the card? Silence. Wolfe's eyes didn't move. Mr. Harrow? Harrow shifted. I didn't read the reverse. You did. I beg your pardon. You read it, Wolfe said flatly. And someone else did as well. That's why it vanished within minutes. Harrow looked at me, then back at Wolfe. And what exactly are you implying? That you are less interested in recovering the document than you are in managing fallout. I assure you, assurances, Mr. Harrow, are for diplomats and debtors. I want facts. Harrow stood abruptly. I didn't come here to be accused. You came here to contain a fire. You'll find I am not water. I am smoke. I go where the source is. With that, Harrow gave a curt nod and walked out, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood. Wolfe didn't speak until the door closed. He's withholding something, Wolfe said. About the card. About everything. His primary concern is reputation, not justice, not clarity. That makes him a liability. Think he's our thief? No, Wolfe said, but I believe he knows who is. That gave me something to chew on. At 11, Fenwick arrived. He was less composed than before. His suit was wrinkled, his tie slightly askew, and the calm confidence I'd seen at the club was replaced by a kind of defensive edge. Wolfe greeted him with silence, as usual. I offered a seat. He declined it. You said you had questions about voting records. Wolfe didn't look up from his hands. You're nervous, Mr. Fenwick. I'm irritated. I don't like being summoned. Then leave. Fenwick blinked. Wolfe continued. You and Mr. Belgrave disagreed on more than club policy. You voted against his transparency motion, yes? I did. It was reckless. Because it threatened the club? Or because it threatened you? Fenwick's jaw tightened. Excuse me. You were once accused, though never charged, of using club funds to support a private campaign, yes? Those accusations were baseless. But the audit. Committee found irregularities. Fenwick's face colored. That was 15 years ago. Some stains don't fade. I will not be interrogated. Wolfe shifted slightly in his chair. Mr. Fenwick, Mr. Belgrave had a pattern. He discovered sensitive information and used it to gain leverage. I believe he discovered something about you, something he planned to reveal. Fenwick opened. His mouth then shut it. I believe, Wolfe continued, that you retrieved the card he left behind, because on the reverse was a date and a location, a meeting place. Fenwick swallowed. That's conjecture. It's probability, Wolfe said. Belgrave was never careless. If he left a card, it was a signal. You took it thinking you could control the outcome, but now he's gone and you don't know what else he left behind. I had nothing to do with his disappearance. Did you meet him? Silence. Did you go to the location? Fenwick shifted on his feet. I thought he wanted to talk, to settle things. And did he? No, Fenwick said quietly. He never showed up. Wolfe closed his eyes. "Thank you." Fenwick looked between us, uncertain. Then he left, quietly, but not without leaving a trail of discomfort behind him. When the door clicked shut, Wolfe opened his eyes. "We have enough." Enough to what? To understand the pressure. Harrow is hiding negligence. Fenwick is hiding fear. Belgrave was manipulating both. I asked, "And Helmsley?" "He remains curiously absent. Tomorrow we remedy that." I nodded, already anticipating resistance. "And the card?" Wolfe looked at me. It was not a threat. It was a lure. And someone took the bait. By the time I arranged a meeting with Senator Helmsley, the air outside the Corinthian Club had turned from chill to bite. It was late afternoon, and a brittle wind was working its way down from the Hudson, shaking the last of the winter grit off the sidewalks. I'd called ahead and left a message with his secretary, one Mrs. Drollinger, who sounded like she'd sooner wrestle a bear than allow unannounced visitors into the senator's presence. But I dropped Wolfe's name, and suddenly doors began creaking open. We met not at the club, but at the senator's private townhouse, a 4-story limestone affair on Park Avenue, the kind of place where curtains are thick and conversations don't echo. I was led into a library that smelled of old books, polished wood, and a whiff of something medicinal, eucalyptus maybe, or the remnants of a lozenge habit. Robert Helmsley entered 10 minutes late, flanked by shadows and wearing a dark blue suit that looked like it had been pressed by a man who didn't like wrinkles or compromise. He had that seasoned political look, thick white hair, wide shoulders, and eyes that measured every syllable before you said it. He shook my hand, firm but not warm. "Mr. Goodwin, my assistant said you're here on behalf of Mr. Wolfe." "That's right." He gestured to a chair. "I've never had the pleasure of meeting the man, but I know the name. And I understand this concerns Quentin Belgrave, among others." Helmsley sat across from me and folded his hands over one knee. "Then let's make it quick." He sounded tired. Not the kind of tired you get from lack of sleep, but the kind that builds from watching things fall apart and knowing you can't stop the collapse. I started with the basics. "You had tea with Belgrave on Sunday." "Yes." "What did you talk about?" He didn't answer right away. "Then, policy and betrayal. That's a heavy tea. He confronted me about a speech I gave 3 weeks ago, accused me of hypocrisy, of clinging to outdated values. Was he wrong? I've served this country in 3 wars, 2 branches of government, and more committees than I can count," Helmsley said. "I'm not afraid of change, but I'm cautious with it." I let the silence stretch. "And then?" He said he had proof. Of what, he didn't say. Only that it would become public. Did he mention a manifesto? Helmsley's eyes flicked just once. "No. But you know what I'm talking about. I've heard whispers." "From Fenwick? Harrow?" He smiled grimly. "From the club's walls. They're thick, but not deaf." I shifted in my seat. "Senator, do you believe Belgrave was blackmailing you?" He took a long breath, then looked directly at me. "I believe he was testing me, seeing how far he could push before I pushed back." "Did you?" "No," Helmsley said. I left the lounge. I did not return to the club until Monday evening, and by then he was gone. No calls, no contact, nothing. "What do you think happened to him?" His gaze dropped for the first time. "I think he made a mistake. A dangerous one. You think someone silenced him? I think, he said slowly, that people with reputations to protect will go to great lengths to avoid public shame. Whether that includes threats, bribes, or something worse, I couldn't say. I made a note of that. A man like Helmsley didn't speak hypothetically. He spoke in code, and this was his version of flashing a signal without raising his hand. I stood. Mr. Wolfe would like you to keep yourself available. I'm not hiding. No, I said, but you might be watched. He gave a humorless smile. They've been watching me for 40 years, Mr. Goodwin. I'm used to it. When I returned to the brownstone, Fritz was prepping for dinner, and the smell of rosemary and roasting duck had filled the air like a private symphony. I found Wolfe in the office, sorting through seed catalogues with the kind of intensity most men reserve for national budgets. I gave him the account of my meeting, watching him as he listened with half-lidded eyes and zero visible movement. When I mentioned the senator's quote about betrayal and reputations, Wolfe stirred slightly. Helmsley is not a killer, he said, but he is a realist, and that makes him dangerous. Belgrave threatened him, I said. He admitted it. Not in so many words, but enough. Wolfe nodded. And now Belgrave is missing. The manifesto is missing, and the senator's enemies within the club or beyond might view his silence as guilt. I sat at my desk. You think someone's framing him? I think someone is clearing a path. Whether Helmsley was the destination or an obstacle is not yet clear. I asked, should I call Kramer? Wolfe grimaced. Not yet. Inspector Kramer has little patience for half-built puzzles. I prefer to show him the entire picture. There was a pause. Then Wolfe said, tomorrow you will return to the Corinthian Club. I want you to visit Belgrave's private quarters. Harrow may resist, overrule him. And if the room's been cleaned? It won't have been. Clubs of that nature preserve absences until they become funerals. I stood. Anything in particular I should look for? Wolfe tilted his head slightly. A second card, or a note, or something rearranged. I blinked. Rearranged. An object slightly out of place. Belgrave was orderly. If he left in haste or under pressure, he may have left something behind unintentionally. Or intentionally. Exactly. As I turned to go, he added, also, ask Fritz to prepare the cellar. We may have guests before the end of the week. I paused. Guests. All the players are assembling. We'll need a stage. Dinner that night was quiet. Wolfe ate without comment, except to compliment the sauce and scowl at the wine pairing. I watched him from across the table. Gans thought about what it meant to be powerful without moving an inch. Wolfe never left his chair, never chased a suspect, never raised his voice, and yet he was more dangerous than any man I'd ever met. And someone out there had crossed him. They just didn't know it yet. If the Corinthian Club had a heartbeat, it lived somewhere upstairs, on the second floor behind thick doors and polished brass locks. That's where the private member suites were kept. Not quite bedrooms, not quite offices. More like sanctuaries for the old guard to escape the world while pretending they were still relevant in it. Each one had a name, not a number, and the E-Side E. Names were printed in embossed calligraphy on miniature wooden plaques. Belgrave said simply, QB member since 1984. I had expected pushback from Harrow when I asked to see it. What I got was worse. An apology, a sigh, and a key handed over with fingers that trembled just enough to register. I trust, he said, You'll be discreet. Always, I told him. He didn't believe me, but he didn't stop me either. Belgrave's suite was at the far end of the east corridor. The hallway was quiet, carpeted in a faded houndstooth pattern, and smelled like old pipe tobacco and older privilege. When I opened the door, the air inside was still. Not stale exactly, but the kind of stillness that comes from being undisturbed for too long. It felt like stepping into the moment right after someone left the room, except the someone hadn't returned. The room was laid out with precise elegance. A mahogany writing desk sat by the window, its surface too clean to be accidental. A pair of wing-back chairs faced the hearth, where a charred log sat half-burned in the grate. On the sideboard, a decanter of sherry and 2 empty glasses stood untouched. The bed was neatly made. On the bedside table, a dog-eared copy of Cicero's Orations and a pair of linen gloves. I took my time. The first sweep turned up nothing unusual. No notes, no discarded envelopes, no signs of struggle. But Wolfe hadn't sent me here for the obvious. He wanted me to look for what didn't belong, or rather, what had once belonged and had been carefully, deliberately removed. I checked the drawers in the desk. A fountain pen, blank notepads, a single letter opener with a Corinthian Club insignia on the handle. A square of felt where something had once rested. A box? A frame? Hard to say. It was gone now. Next I examined the mantel. On the far left side, a small jade elephant faced inward. Its twin on the right faced outward. The asymmetry was subtle, easy to miss, but I didn't miss it. Wolfe would have noticed too. I turned both elephants to face forward, then stood back and looked at the space between them. A fine line of dust suggested something square had been there and recently removed. A photo frame, maybe, or something heavier. A clue, possibly, or a decoy. Moving to the closet, I found exactly what I expected. Suits arranged by shade, shoes by frequency of wear, and ties in a drawer organized like color-coded serpents, but tucked in the breast pocket of a charcoal. Wool blazer was a small card, the same kind described by both Harrow and Fenwick. White, embossed initials, QB Laurel crest in faded gold ink. On the reverse, in tight handwriting, Wednesday cloister room, 8 p.m., no second chances. I let out a low whistle. The cloister room was on the club's ground floor, reserved for confidential meetings. Soundproofed, no windows, very private, and very absent from anyone's story so far. Belgrave had arranged a meeting, but with who? I slipped the card into my notebook and checked the time. 10:44 a.m., still early enough to catch a few of the staff before things got too formal. I left the suite as I found it, locking the door behind me and heading back down to the service wing. Lydia Trent met me near the staff kitchen, carrying a tray of polished silver sugar bowls. "Again?" she said, raising a brow. "Don't worry. I'm not staying for lunch. Just one question. Who has access to the cloister room?" She paused. "All senior members, and staff with keys." "Which staff?" "Only 2. Myself and Willard. Head porter." "Was it used recently?" She thought a moment. "Wednesday evening, yes, I helped set it up myself. Tea, sherry, 2 glasses." "Who requested it?" "No request was logged, but I saw Mr. Belgrave enter around 7:50, alone." "Did he come out?" She hesitated. "No, not while I was watching." "Who was near the room afterward?" "I recall seeing Mr. Fenwick pacing in the library around 8:30. and Mr. Harrow stepped out of the lounge looking agitated. That was worth filing. I returned to the brownstone just before noon and gave Wolfe the highlights. He listened without comment until I described the reversed jade elephants. "That's deliberate," he said. "Belgrave was no fool. He left a gap. To suggest something was taken? Or to invite someone to think it had been?" I handed him the card. He studied it without touching it directly, as if the ink might smudge the truth. "This," he said, "is a trap. One set by Belgrave. You think he knew someone would come after him?" "I think," Wolfe said slowly, "that Belgrave was never the prey. He was the predator, but he misjudged something." "Like what?" "The appetite of his adversary." Wolfe stood, a rare and unsettling event, and crossed to the bookshelves, pulling down a slim volume of club histories he'd asked Saul to retrieve earlier. He opened to a marked page and turned it toward me. "There," he said. "The cloister room." I read, "Originally designed for confidential arbitrations among members, strictly off record, no minutes, no surveillance, used only in internal disputes deemed delicate in nature." I looked up. "So who else knew Belgrave would be there?" "That," Wolfe said, "is our next question." He returned to his chair and leaned back. "Archie, tomorrow arrange a visit to the cloister room. I want every detail. And speak again with the porter, Willard. He sees more than people think." "Understood." Wolfe tapped a finger against his armrest. "We are approaching the fulcrum." "And when we reach it?" "We tip. If the Corinthian Club's cloister room had a soul, it was buried under velvet and varnish. The space was designed for silence, intentional, cloistered silence, and as I stepped through its thick oak door the next morning, the effect was immediate. No sound from the hallway followed me, and even my footsteps felt swallowed, like the carpet itself had taken a vow of discretion. The room was rectangular, no windows, with tall panelled walls broken only by 2 oil portraits, and a shallow alcove that held an empty sideboard. A fire grate stood cold at one end, its brass guard polished but unused. The light came from recessed sconces hidden in the ceiling corners, giving the place a sepia glow, as if it were trying to forget what century it was. I closed the door behind me, alone for now, and just stood for a moment. Wolfe had told me to absorb everything: texture, scent, furniture arrangement, even shadows. The room wasn't merely a space, it was part of the crime, or at least the setup. There were 4 leather chairs arranged in a semicircle around a low walnut table. On the table, 2 faint ring stains, the kind left by sherry glasses. One glass had been placed directly across from the other, with a gap of roughly 3 feet between. A conversation had taken place here, planned, measured, and, if I had to guess, tense. No spilled liquid, no ash, no crumbs or coasters. I examined the sideboard and found a small drawer that stuck on the pull. Inside was a linen napkin and 2 unused cocktail stirrers. Clean, pristine. But I noticed a folded edge of the napkin had a light brown smudge, not coffee, not ink, lipstick, faint but present. And Belgrave, as far as I knew, didn't wear any. I made a note of it and moved to the only unusual fixture in the room, the small ventilation panel high on the south wall near the molding. It wasn't large enough for anything but air to pass through, but it was open, and a faint trace of something sweet hung in the air. Not cologne, not pipe smoke. I recognized it after a moment. Jasmine, a scent occasionally used in niche perfumes. More importantly, a scent that lingered far longer than it was welcome. The knock came 3 minutes later. Willard the porter stepped in when I waved him through. He was a tall, wiry man with a thin moustache and eyes like polished marble, flat, unreadable. The kind of guy who had watched generations of privilege play out like stage rehearsals and knew better than to take sides. "Appreciate you coming down," I said. "I need 5 minutes." He nodded. "I don't say much, Mr. Goodwin. I keep schedules. Carry coats. That's what I'm paid for. First in mamutebituti karisamafana. And sometimes you see things that other people don't." He shrugged. "Comes with the job." I pointed to the table. "Who came into this room Wednesday night?" "I saw Mr. Belgrave enter at about 10 to 8. He was alone. I unlocked the room for him." "Did he say anything?" "Said he'd only be a few minutes, asked for privacy." "Did he request a second place setting?" "No, that was already there. Someone had arranged for 2. "That was interesting." "And then?" "I left. I had other duties. Came back around 9:30. The room was empty. Belgrave had gone." "You saw him leave?" "No, that's the part I can't explain." I looked up. "Meaning?" "I never saw him leave. Neither did the doorman on shift. But he wasn't in the building when I checked the upper floor at 10, just vanished." "You're sure?" He didn't blink. "I've worked this club for 26 years. No one slips past me. But that night, something felt off." "Did you smell anything?" A pause. "Sweet, like jasmine. Thought it was a cleaning agent, but I don't think anyone came in to clean." "Anyone else around that time?" "Mr. Fenwick passed through around 8:15, looked agitated, went into the lounge, came out 5 minutes later. Then Mr. Harrow came down from the boardroom, around 9. "And the senator?" Willard hesitated. "He arrived around 8:20. Didn't stay long, spoke to no one." "That you saw?" "That I saw," he agreed. I jotted it all down. "Last question. You ever see a woman in this room?" "Not supposed to happen. Not club policy." "But," he looked at me, then away, "there was a woman here. I heard heels, just once, around 9. You see her?" "No, but I know the sound. It wasn't Lydia. Wasn't staff." I nodded. "Thanks, Willard." Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe with his eyes closed in what looked like meditation but was actually thinking. He opened them the moment I stepped into the room. "You were thorough," he said. "I heard your footfalls upon re-entry." I handed over my notes. "Belgrave met someone, not a man. Jasmine perfume, lipstick on a napkin, high heels at 9. Willard's sure." Wolfe leaned back, steepled his fingers. "Someone arranged for 2 guests in the cloister room, but Belgrave only asked for 1 place setting. Someone else wanted the meeting formalized." "Harrow?" "No, he wouldn't dare." "Fenwick?" "Too blunt, too easily startled." "The woman?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "and she's not on any membership list." I frowned. "Then who is she?" "That," he said, "is the question that will unlock the rest." I sat. "You think Belgrave trusted her?" "I think he overestimated her, or underestimated her influence over someone else." I leaned forward. "You think she's connected to Helmsley?" "No." Wolfe said quietly. I think she's connected to all of them. The silence stretched for several seconds. Finally, Wolfe spoke again. Tomorrow. Call them all. Harrow, Fenwick, Helmsley, and Lydia Trent. You want them here? Yes, and Willard too, at 6 sharp. You think they'll come? They will, he said. And if they refuse, then they'll learn what it means to provoke a sedentary man with a perfect memory. I smiled and closed my notebook. The trap, it seemed, was almost set. At precisely 6 o'clock the next evening, the brownstone resembled a chessboard laid out for endgame. Every piece in place, every move calculated. Wolfe was in his chair, immovable and serene, with the globe decanter of Madeira on the corner, table and a glass untouched beside it. The windows were shut. The air was still. Only the faintest aroma of Fritz's early supper, veal shank with thyme, escaped the kitchen. I had done my part. One by one, I made the calls that morning. Harrow answered with tight civility and a murmur of resignation. Fenwick was less cooperative, accusing me of manipulative tactics, but agreed after I mentioned Wolfe would issue his findings with or without an audience. Helmsley was brief. Lydia Trent simply said, "Understood." Willard took the longest to reach. He was polishing a bronze railing when I called, but accepted Wolfe's invitation like it was a court summons. By the time they began to arrive, I had chairs arranged in Wolfe's office in a neat arc, leaving only one conspicuously empty directly across from Wolfe's desk. Wolfe had insisted on that one. "It's for the invisible party," he'd said. "Every mystery must acknowledge its ghost." At 6 sharp, Harrow entered first. He wore a grey wool suit, one button too tightly fastened, and looked like a man entering his own funeral chapel. He nodded to me, then Wolfe, and sat on the leftmost chair, crossing his legs carefully. Fenwick arrived moments later, visibly irritated. He wore a tan trench coat he refused to remove as if it might shield him from the questions to come. He didn't greet anyone, he just sat. Then came Senator Helmsley, trailed by his aide, who waited in the hallway like a bodyguard, refusing to be seen. Helmsley, for his part, was collected, crisp and cold. He acknowledged Wolfe with a dry good evening and took the center chair. Lydia Trent arrived alone. She had changed out of her steward's uniform into a civilian blouse and skirt, modest but well-fitted. Her gaze swept the room once and landed on Wolfe with more curiosity than fear. She sat on the right, hands folded. Finally Willard entered with the quiet authority of a man used to witnessing power, but never speaking within its circle. Wolfe motioned for him to take the remaining chair. There were 6 of us in the room now. 7, if you counted Wolfe. 8, if you counted the empty chair. Wolfe didn't speak at once. He let the silence settle until it became the atmosphere. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we are here because a man has vanished, and with him a document of symbolic, though not monetary value. You have each offered partial truths, motivated by fear, vanity, or obligation, but none have told the full story." Harrow opened his mouth, but Wolfe silenced him with a flick of the fingers. "Mr. Harrow," he said, "you failed in your solemn duty of custodianship. You signed out the manifesto at Mr. Belgrave's request and allowed it to linger unattended, but you did not take it. Nor did you, Mr. Fenwick." Fenwick scoffed. "And how do you know that?" Because the person who took it did not require access. She required invitation. Now everyone shifted. Wolfe continued. Mr. Belgrave was playing a game. He baited each of you. He threatened Helmsley with exposure. He antagonized Fenwick. He manipulated Harrow's need for discretion. But he had another ally, or thought he did. He gestured toward the empty chair. She is not here because she cannot be. But she was present in the cloister room on Wednesday. She wore jasmine. She drank sherry. She left a lipstick trace. Lydia spoke quietly. You mean a woman? But women aren't allowed in that room. They're not, Wolfe said. But exceptions are. Made quietly off the record, when the woman in question is persuasive or when she holds leverage. Wolfe turned his gaze to Helmsley. Senator, you once served on the club's Special Ethics Committee. Helmsley nodded once. During your tenure, were you aware of a junior member attempting to expose favoritism in the club's investment trust? I was. Was that member Belgrave? Helmsley hesitated. Yes. And the woman who supplied Belgrave with the details of that favoritism, was she your daughter-in-law? That hit the room like a glass dropped on marble. Helmsley stared unmoving. His fingers tightened slightly on the armrest. Wolfe continued. She married your son briefly. She was not well liked, but she had access. Belgrave used her, perhaps romantically, certainly strategically. And on Wednesday night she came to the club under Belgrave's invitation. You knew this, Senator, because you followed her. Helmsley said nothing. Wolfe shifted his eyes to Fenwick. You, Mr. Fenwick, arrived at the cloister room later. You had intercepted the card left on the saucer days earlier. You believed the meeting was with you. Fenwick paled but said nothing. Wolfe turned last to Harrow. You learned of the meeting after it had taken place. When Belgrave did not check out or return his key, you went to his suite and discovered the missing photograph, the one that had been sitting between the jade elephants. You took it. Why? Harrow licked his lips. Because it showed the woman, and Belgrave, in a position, compromising to the club. Wolfe sat back. Willard, he said, you never saw Belgrave leave, that's correct? Yes, sir. But you saw the woman. I heard her. Heels, around 9. And at 9:15, Wolfe said slowly, Mr. Harrow, you sent an urgent memo to the club president requesting an emergency board meeting for the next day. Harrow looked down. You were buying time, Wolfe said, but not because Belgrave had fled. Because Belgrave had fallen. The silence deepened. No one killed Belgrave, Wolfe said softly. He collapsed, likely from a pre-existing condition exacerbated by stress. The woman panicked and fled. The body was later removed quietly by someone with discretion and motive, someone who did not want a scandal tied to his family. All eyes turned to Helmsley. Wolfe's voice sharpened. You arranged for a private physician. You moved the body to another location. You claimed plausible deniability. But in doing so, you disrupted every thread of this club's order. The document was never the danger. The danger was the relationship Belgrave had cultivated and the truths it revealed. Helmsley stood. Are you accusing me of a crime? I am describing an act, Wolfe said. Whether it is a crime depends on what you do next. Helmsley looked at Harrow, at Fenwick, at Lydia. Then he said, the body is at the family mausoleum. Belgrave's family has already been informed of a private health crisis. They accepted the story. No autopsy? I asked. No need. Wolfe nodded once. Then justice, in its roughest form, has been met. Mr. Harrow, you will restore the manifesto and issue a private censure for misuse of privilege. Mr. Fenwick, you will step down from your committee. And, Senator, you will resign your club membership quietly, permanently. No one objected. They left in silence. When the door shut, Wolfe finally sipped his glass. "Archie," he said, "make a note to Fritz. No guests for a week." Understood. "And burn whatever remains of the sherry. It smells of secrets." The brownstone always feels different the morning after a gathering. Even when no blood is spilled, no cuffs are snapped, no cameras flash, something lingers in the air. It isn't guilt or victory. Wolfe would call it expended tension. I'd call it relief with an aftertaste. Fritz served us breakfast at 9. Poached eggs over toasted brioche, a sliver of smoked trout, and a saffron hollandaise that managed to be better than my mood. Wolfe, of course, offered no comment on the previous evening. He never did until he was sure all the facts had landed, like leaves after a storm. "You satisfied?" I asked between bites. He didn't answer. That meant yes. After the plates were cleared, I moved into the office, coffee in hand, and set about organizing my notes. Outside, the March wind had picked up again. A paper swirled across the stoop and vanished under a car. The world had gone back to spinning the way it always does, slightly off axis, but forward nonetheless. Wolfe remained in his chair, silent, eyes closed. Not sleeping, not meditating, just existing in that fortress of stillness he builds around himself when he's done wringing the truth from people who'd rather keep it bottled. I reviewed everything. Belgrave's disappearance, the missing manifesto, the cloister room, the woman, unnamed, uninvited, and yet pivotal. Helmsley's quiet confession. The manipulation of silence dressed up as diplomacy. I flipped to the page in my notebook where I'd written in Wolfe's voice the conclusion. The danger was never in the act, but in the knowledge of it. That was Wolfe's guiding principle. People weren't undone by crime. They were undone by exposure. And in a place like the Corinthian Club, exposure was a greater threat than guilt. Just after 11, the phone rang. I picked up. Nero Wolfe's office, Archie Goodwin speaking. A pause. Then, "This is Lydia Trent." Her voice was level, composed, no tremor, no apology. "What can I do for you, Miss Trent?" "I wanted to inform you that the club's executive board met this morning. Mr. Harrow has been reaffirmed as president. For now. Mr. Fenwick has tendered his resignation, and the manifesto has been quietly restored to its original case in the archive. No press? None. Just silence, as expected. And Helmsley? His resignation was processed. Effective immediately, he's no longer a member. I leaned back, inefficient. She exhaled softly. "You won't get a thank you from them, Mr. Goodwin, but I thought you should know." "Thanks, Lydia. And for what it's worth, you were the most honest person in that room." "That," she said, "isn't saying much." The line went dead. Wolfe opened his eyes. "She confirmed the resolutions?" he asked. "All of them. Club cleaned house, quietly." He nodded once, then reached for the daily paper, which he'd already folded to the crossword. I sat back in my chair and stared at the far wall, where Wolfe's old globe stood half-shadowed in the afternoon light. I could still smell the faint trace of last night's gathering. Brandy, cloves, dust. Fritz had polished the wood, of course, but some things hang in the air longer than lemon oil can touch. I cleared my throat. You think Helmsley really did it, covered up a death? He did, Wolfe said. And the woman? Gone. Will she stay gone? She will, because she knows the rules better than any of them. Never be the last one holding the truth. I grunted. Belgrave held too much then. He played a game with men who were better at playing dead than playing fair. He mistook strategy for immunity. And the manifesto? Symbolic, nothing more. But symbols can be used as weapons when wielded by the clever or the desperate. I watched him for a minute. You enjoy this, don't you? No, he said, I endure it. Justice is a tedious business, especially when it masquerades as decorum. I smiled. You want me to call Inspector Kramer? He sighed. What for? There is no crime to prosecute, only conduct to remember. That was the end of that. That afternoon I filed away the notes. Wolfe insisted on paper files, never electronic. Ink endures, he said once, when power fails. I labelled the folder Corinthian Belgrave and slid it into the cabinet under C. It wouldn't be pulled again. The club wouldn't call back. They had seen the worst outcome already, exposure, and they would spend the next decade pretending nothing had ever happened. That evening, dinner was lamb in garlic reduction with rosemary potatoes and poached pears for dessert. Wolfe complimented Fritz in full sentences, which meant he was content. Afterward, he retreated to the orchid room to speak to his plants. In Latin. I poured myself a brandy and sank into my armchair, alone for the first time all day. Outside, the wind carried the scent of spring, trying to punch through the concrete. I wondered if Belgrave had known what was coming. Had he orchestrated his own ruin? Had he trusted the wrong person at the wrong moment? Or had he just believed in something too much? Either way, he was gone. And the club, the Grand Corinthian Club, had returned to normal. Scotch was poured, cigars lit, politics murmured, and scandals buried beneath new upholstery. But one chair in the reading room remained empty. They hadn't filled it, not yet, maybe never, because sometimes the memory of disruption is enough to keep order intact. It was a full week before Wolfe spoke of the Corinthian Club again. 7 days of relative peace at the brownstone, interrupted only by Fritz's impeccable cooking, and my occasional grumbles about the pile of bills that never seemed to shrink. Wolfe retreated into his orchids, emerging only for meals and to berate me for turning pages too loudly during his mid-afternoon perusals. That Friday morning he finally broke the silence. Archie, he said as I poured him his second cup of coffee, do you recall what Mr. Belgrave's original goal was? I tilted my head. Exposing hypocrisy, shaking up the club, making someone flinch? Not quite. He sought influence, but unlike a politician, he believed influence came from knowledge, not power. He wasn't wrong. No, Wolfe said, but he misunderstood the ecosystem in which he operated. Influence without immunity is merely provocation. That was classic Wolfe. Strip the whole affair down to a sentence and hand it back like a wrapped gift. I took a sip of my own coffee and waited. He wasn't done. He mistook the club for a battlefield. It is not. It is a museum. And in museums, the exhibits may be admired but never touched. I leaned back. So he touched something, or someone, and the museum closed the gallery. Exactly. There was a long pause before I spoke again. You regret taking the case? No. I regret that he didn't understand the cost of his tactics. Had he come to me before the damage, we might have prevented the consequence. But then, I said, you wouldn't have had the pleasure of confronting 6 powerful people in your office and making them feel like children in confession. He gave me a faint look, part disdain, part agreement. Pleasure, Mr. Goodwin, is not my profession. Precision is. Which, in Wolfe's universe, was practically giddy enthusiasm. Later that afternoon, a padded envelope arrived by courier. No return address, but I knew the handwriting before I opened it. Inside, a single object wrapped in thin linen cloth. A photograph, the photograph, Belgrave and the woman seated together in the cloister room, candlelight, a bottle of sherry on the table. Her face was angled toward him, lips parted mid-laugh. His hand unmistakably rested on hers. On the back a single line written in blue ink, "For the record that doesn't exist." I showed it to Wolfe. He didn't touch it. He merely examined it for 20 seconds, then gave a short nod. She sent it, he said. Why? Because she wanted us to know she was real. I slipped the photo back into the envelope and sealed it. What do we do with it? Nothing. That's it. She has already disappeared. If she wanted to be found, she wouldn't have sent a photo. She would have sent herself. It was another rule in Wolfe's unspoken playbook. Some truths exist only to be acknowledged, not chased. That night the club called again, this time Harrow. He wanted to offer gratitude, which is what men like him call the preservation of reputation. Wolfe declined the invitation to dine as expected. I, however, was given a curt nod of permission when Harrow suggested I attend a quiet acknowledgement ceremony at the club's library. They're unveiling a portrait, Harrow said, Belgrave, small, discreet. I didn't expect, so I went. The Corinthian Club was back to its usual rhythms. Fires crackled, slippers shuffled, and secrets hid beneath silver serving trays. In the library, a dozen members gathered around a velvet-draped easel. The portrait was modest. Belgrave at midlife, contemplative, sitting in one of the club's leather chairs, a stack of papers beside him and a pen in hand. They didn't mention the manifesto. They didn't mention the scandal. They didn't mention the woman. But they didn't erase him either. Harrow approached after the unveiling. Mr. Goodwin, you've done us a service. Didn't feel like one. Nonetheless, he paused. There's talk of amending the bylaws. Open membership? Selective openness. I gave a dry chuckle. Sounds revolutionary. He didn't smile. Evolution is slower, but less painful. I left the club before the brandy started flowing. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the kitchen discussing veal tenderness with Fritz. I dropped my coat, poured myself a drink, and returned to the office. The house was quiet, and for once I didn't mind. At 9 o'clock, Wolfe returned to his chair. I handed him a copy of the speech Harrow gave at the unveiling, light on detail, heavy on dignity. Wolfe read it, then folded the paper and placed it beside him. He's learning, Wolfe said. Harrow? Yes, but he's still playing the same game, just using different pieces. You think there'll be another Belgrave? There always is. And when they call, he leaned back, his voice softer now, then we will listen, not because they deserve justice, but because justice sometimes deserves to be heard. That was Wolfe's final rule. Not one you'll find in a handbook, not something carved above a courtroom door, just truth, polished, precise, quiet as a chair turned toward an empty one.